Hello, Wayne County community students. We're getting ready to do the second part of a three-part series on digestion. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the peritoneum a little bit. Peritoneum is actually a large continuous sheet of serous membrane. That's what the peritoneum is. And it lines the walls of the abdominal cavity. This would be considered the parietal layer of the abdominal cavity. And then it has a serous outer coat of organs. And you know that's the visceral layer. Visceral means the organ itself, right? The important thing about this peritoneum is that it binds abdominal organs. Another thing that's pretty good about this too is that mesentery is a fan-shaped projection of the parietal peritoneum. The mesentery allows free movement of the intestine, and it helps prevent strangulation of this long tube. If you get a twisting or turning, we call that strangulation of the gastrointestinal tract, it will cause serious problems, and that will require emergency surgery. So these things, the peritoneum, and especially this mesentery, which is a fan-shaped projection of peritoneum, parietal peritoneum, it does help keep the organ in a one nice tubular form and not turned on itself or twisted. All right, let's talk about the largest organ in the body, which is the liver. We know the largest organ of the body is skin, but now we're going inside and we're going to be in the abdominal cavity, and the largest organ there is the liver. So the liver is the largest gland in the body. It weighs about 4 pounds. So let's talk about the liver. It lies just under the diaphragm. It occupies the majority of the right hypochondrium and the right upper quadrant. We went over quadrants before, so just know that the liver is on the right side. And you remember the stomach is on the left. Okay. And it's part of the epigastrum. The liver has 2 lobes, and you can see this in your text. These 2 lobes are separated by a falciform ligament, and you'll see that ligament run down not right down the middle, but over more obtuse, over to the side. And it's going to separate the liver into 2 lobes. You're going to have a left lobe that makes up about less than 20% of the entire liver, but the right lobe makes up a great majority of the liver. It makes up about 80% of the liver, and the right lobe is divided into 3 parts. So you got 2 lobes. You got a right lobe and a left lobe. The left lobe is about 20%, but the right lobe makes up about 80% of the liver. So the right lobe of the liver has 3 parts to it. You got the right lobe proper. That means that is actually the right part of the liver divided by that falciform ligament. You have the caudate lobe. You can see this in your text. And you have the quadrate lobe. Okay? Now I want you to remember that the caudate lobe is near the inferior vena cava, and the quadrate lobe is near the gallbladder. And the way I remember that is this is a Q and this is a G, and it kind of looks like a Q. It's like a little backwards G. I don't know. But anyway, that you have to remember things, do it the way you need to remember things. But that is the way the right lobe of the liver is divided up. And when you flip the liver up and look at the posterior aspect of the liver, you can see, or the underside of the liver, you can see how the lobe, the right lobe and the left lobe are divided, and this right lobe taking up about 80% and divided into these three sections. Right lobe proper means it is proper the right lobe itself, the liver itself. Now, the liver is divided into hepatic lobules. These are anatomical units of the liver, these tiny little hexagonal or pentagonal cylinders. So the liver can be divided up like this. Then some cells sit here, or you could have it like this. That's probably, yeah, like that. So anyway, hexagonal and pentagonal shapes, these little cylinders, and I want you to read a description about the lobules in your textbook and look at the different shapes of a 5-cylinder, 6-cylinder, cylinder shapes of the liver. This is one that's interesting and unique to the liver. It's called Kupffer cells. Kupffer cells are phagocytic liver cells that remove bacteria and worn out red blood cells and any other particles from the bloodstream. These are Kupffer cells, Kupffer cells. If you see those in your reading, those are macrophages, right? Or you could say not macrophages. They are phagocytic liver cells. That's what they are. They patrol in the liver and make sure that they get in all the debris, toxicities, all that stuff. Because that's what the liver really, one of its big main jobs is to turn toxic things into non-toxic things, right? So that before it enters into the inferior vena cava and goes to the rest of the blood system, it should go through the liver to get detoxified. So when people walk around talking about, well, I'm detoxing. If you have good lungs, good kidneys, good liver, you already are detoxified. You don't need to help the system. You can help it by not smoking, by not drinking, and try to stay away from like very polluted environments. That would help detoxify. Other than that, you're not walking around toxic, so people need to stop saying that. I'm going to discuss bile a little later, but I want to go on and tell you about the functions of the liver. I'm always asking about functions. You will see on the exam, we'll talk about functions of the stomach, functions of the liver, functions of the gallbladder, functions of the pancreas. So please know your functions. So the functions of the liver, of course, is to detoxify. We talked about detoxification already. Alcohol is a number one thing in our country, especially probably around the world, except for some countries that practice a different religion. But for our country, for sure, alcohol is a big deal. So the liver is there to detoxify the alcohol so it doesn't overwhelm your blood. Another big one too in our country is acetaminophen, which is the active ingredient in Tylenol. If you don't take Tylenol, or if you don't take most medications, even though they're over the counter, people seem to think that is like, okay, we'll just do what we want to. But everything has a side effect. So just remember that. And Tylenol is metabolized through the liver. So if you're having any problems with your liver, you don't want to take that one. You'll take something like a Motrin or something like that, because that Motrin and things like Motrin are metabolized through the kidneys. But if you have kidney problems, then you take the thing that's metabolized through the liver, which would be Tylenol. So anyway, or with something with acetaminophen. So these, I want you to know that about detoxification in the liver. Another thing, the function of the liver is it secretes bile about a pint per day. Some notes I had, or some place I read too, it was about a liter per day. But now in these notes it says it's a pint per day. The point is that bile is secreted by the liver, and that's a point I need you to know. Bile is stored in the gallbladder, but the hepatocytes from the liver are the ones that secrete the bile, okay? The liver secretes bile. The liver functions to metabolize proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. These are the three things that we as humans can metabolize: proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, and the liver is indeed a part of the essential part of that. The liver stores minerals and vitamins. Remember that the liver can store vitamin A, vitamin B12, and vitamin D as in dog. So vitamins A, B12, and vitamin D. And it also stores this mineral. This is not a vitamin. Iron is a mineral. It also stores iron. So these things you can take too much of, and you don't want to do that. Like vitamin A and D are fat soluble. So you can kind of overdose on those. So like be really careful about that, taking too much of it. Also, the functions of the liver: it produces protein plasma, it produces plasma proteins, and hematopoiesis is involved in hematopoiesis in fetal development. So detoxification, secretion of bile, storing minerals and vitamins, and producing plasma proteins, and involved with erythropoiesis during fetal development are the functions of the liver. Let's look at the gallbladder now. I want to draw the ducts of the gallbladder. And let you know that the gallbladder is on the underside of the liver. Okay? Just put that here. The gallbladder is a pear-shaped sac. It's about 4 inches long, about 1.5 inches wide. It can hold 30 to 50 milliliters of bile. Now remember, bile is stored in the gallbladder. The gallbladder is like a pouch or a sac, but the bile is made in the liver. Just remember that. The gallbladder attaches to the underside of the liver, and it has serous, muscular, and mucus layers compose the walls of the gallbladder, very similar to the stomach, in that the lining mucosal area is called rugae. Remember rugae, those folds in the stomach that allow it to kind of contract and become distended and contract. Well, the same with the gallbladder, because when you eat a fatty meal, it will contract. The gallbladder will contract and push the bile out. And it helps to emulsify fats, to break up large fat globules into small fat droplets known as micelles. But just a minute, let us go over the ducts. So here's the gallbladder. Let's draw the ducts like this. And I'll just kind of make it over here. You got a much better picture in your text, or I'm sure you can look it up somewhere, but I want you to know the names of these things. So I'm going to point it out because I do have a question on the exam about these ducts. Now up here, You just have to pretend that this is a big old liver up here. And these ducts are coming from the liver. These two ducts are coming from the liver, so that would make this these are gonna be, let's see, how I'm gonna do this. The right and left hepatic, you know, hepatic means liver. So these are the right and left hepatic ducts. So the right and left hepatic ducts, they're coming directly from the liver, so that's why you will know that. Then as they merge, like right here is a bifurcation, but as they merge and come together, they have something in common, so it's called the common hepatic duct. Okay, coming from the liver, you know it's hepatic, so, and then they merge and become the common hepatic duct. Over here, this is the gallbladder. So, I'm just drawing it out, you know, like I've stretched everything out so you can see it more clearly. And anytime you see anything like a pouch or bladder, you could call it cystic. So this is going to be known as the cystic duct here. The cystic duct goes along with the gallbladder. Of course, the hepatics go along with the liver. Now the bile is going to come get squeezed out of the gallbladder, maybe due to a nice, I'm not going to say nice, but a nice fatty meal from McDonald's. And the gallbladder is going to squeeze the bile out, and as the bile comes out, it's going to go into the common bile duct. So that helps you know how it's going, right? This right here, we'll just put it I'm just going to put a little organ here so that you will know that this is the pancreas. So this is the pancreatic duct. And then everything gets pushed into the duodenum. How do I say that? I'll just say into, so I'm going to draw it so you can remember. It's that C-shaped part of the small intestines. This is really all stretched out into the duodenum. Everything goes into the small intestines. Everything. Stuff from the stomach goes into the small intestines. Contents from the pancreas go into the small intestines. So this is the way bile comes down like this. It gets stored here. Have a fatty meal, it comes out, and it goes in here. Things from the pancreatic duct go that way too. That's just so you'll know that the liver, the right and left hepatic ducts join together and make the common hepatic duct. Over here is the gallbladder, so we know that duct attached to the gallbladder is the cystic duct. When the cystic duct and the common hepatic duct connect, they have something in common because bile is coming from there, and that's the common bile duct going into the duodenum. That is the goal, is to get the bile going into the duodenum. And then the pancreas has a duct that shoots out alkaline material to also go into the duodenum. Small intestines, the stomach empties contents, of course, into the duodenum. Everything has to go into the duodenum initially. And I need you to remember how these ducts look. So bile is secreted by hepatocytes, right? They're composed of bile salts, phospholipids, cholesterol, bilirubin, but mainly water. Water makes up about 97% of bile. Bile is there to make fats easier to absorb, right? You don't want a fatty stool, and this is what can happen. And I'm going to answer that question in a minute. I want you to know that bile aids in the absorption of fats. 80% of bile salts are recycled in the liver to once again become part of bile. Hepatocytes, so the liver extracts the bilirubin and excretes it into bile. Bilirubin is really pigment. And if you get it where, since you guys asked that question, I will answer it. Suppose you get stones. There's a good picture in your text with gallstones. And they're like little rocks, actually. So let's see if I can. Yeah. So they're like little rocks. So here's the gallbladder. And you have all these stones in there because you just had a high fatty meal, like for most of, say, your adult life. You just go to McDonald's all the time, which is like crazy. But then you get these, you develop these stones. But that's not the only way to get stones. Having a pregnancy you can get gallstones. Native peoples of this country have a high propensity of getting gallstones. Don't know why. Being a fertile 40-ish overweight fat woman would give you a propensity to having stones. So really estrogen has a lot to do with developing stones. Your lifestyle, you eat a lot of fatty foods, etc. Anyway, you can get this removed, right? You can get, once you start developing stones, and if you ever passed a gallstone, it can be quite horrendous. I've heard it hurts a great deal. And I want you to know that stones can, let me make a stone here. That's like an exaggeration, that's a huge stone. It can block the bile from going into the duodenum. Well, where do you think it's going to go? It's going to seep out into the body, right? It's going to block. What will come out of that will be a pigment, actually jaundice. The yellow pigment will start to come out, the bilirubin, and you'll be jaundiced, and your skin will turn yellowish. Your mucosa, your lips, your mouth will be kind of yellowish. Your eyes, the sclera will be yellow. The palms, the soles of your, the palms of your hands, soles of your feet will be yellow. So that person will end up having a high bilirubin. The liver is doing its job, it's pumping out the bile, but now the stone is preventing that from the bilirubin from the bile from getting into the duodenum to be further processed. So we can definitely do what we call as a cholecystectomy, right? You can remove the gallbladder, and I'll just stitch this up right here. Just stitch that up. And you were supposed to change your diet before that came to that point. And we'll just bust up the stone going, or try to let it pass if it's not going to rupture or anything. And you can still have some bile coming down because it still comes from the liver, but it's not going to be nearly enough bile to help emulsify fat. So you'll probably continue the same diet, a lot of fried chicken, a lot of McDonald's and stuff, and your stool will be fatty. It's not going to hurt you or anything, but you definitely won't be able to absorb the kinds of vitamins and the kinds of things that you usually will be able to metabolize. So like I said, that word, when you have get rid of the gallbladder, that is surgically removed. That is a cholecystectomy. Any ectomy, right? Like a hysterectomy, vasectomy. Hysterectomy, remove all the uterus. Vasectomy is like a little snippet of the vas deferens in males. That's a procedure. This is a surgical removal of gallbladder. And why would we have that? Because of cholelithiasis. Oops. And that is inflammation and stone formation. Inflammation and stone formation. This is when you get the gallstones. right? Requiring that. And then you could have something too called cholecystitis. Cystitis, you know, is the gallbladder itself. So this is inflammation. Now, anytime you see these itises, that's inflammation. Inflammation of the gallbladder. So, cystitis is inflammation of the gallbladder. Cholecystectomy is the surgical removal of the gallbladder, and cholelithiasis is inflammation and stone formation. Functions of the gallbladder, you know, it stores bile. That's what it does. And that enters it by way of the hepatic and cystic ducts. So it goes to the gallbladder from the hepatic and the cystic duct, which I just erased here, and the bile gets stored in the gallbladder. Jaundice is a yellow discoloration of the skin and mucosa when bile flow is obstructed. From anytime you have a obstruction of the bile flowing into the duodenum, that will have a tendency to cause jaundice, and you'll have to be yellowing of the skin. So let's go on to the pancreas now. We're just mainly talking about some organs or glands that are in the abdominal area. Pancreas is interesting in that it's a dual organ, right? Meaning it has a couple of roles. Pancreas. The pancreas is a grayish pink colored gland, not that big, about 6 to 9 inches long, weighing about only 60 grams. It has a head, a neck, and in the C-shaped curve of the duodenum, and a neck that's in the C-shaped curve of the duodenum, and a body is horizontal behind the stomach, and its tail touches the spleen. So I like the pancreas because it reminds me of an animal. It has a head, a neck, and a tail. And the head is kind of sits, you know how the duodenum is C-shaped? The head kind of sits in the crux of that C shape, and you kind of just think that the duodenum kind of has its arm around the pancreas, trying to console it from all the high glucose diet that we Americans have. So it's like the duodenum is going, there, pancreas, don't worry about it. Just try to make enough insulin to combat all the sugar that's in our diet in this country. So anyway, that's to me how the pancreas looks. The pancreas is composed of 2 different types of glandular tissue, exocrine and endocrine. I just said very early on that the pancreas is a dual organ, and it's got an exocrine portion and an endocrine. You guys remember exocrine means ducts, right? You're going to have ducts, and endocrine means no ducts, meaning whatever the pancreas secretes or any organ, if it's endocrine, it'll just go directly into the blood without having a tube to go through. Most of the pancreas is exocrine. We just saw a duct going from the pancreas and emptying into the duodenum. So that's exocrine, right? I want you to notice composed of most of the exocrine glandular tissue with a compound acinar arrangement. In your text, you'll see this compound means ducts are going to have branches to it, and acinar means that they are shaped in grape-like arrangement, like bunches. Right? That's the way the pancreas tissue looks. It's very kind of friable. This makes it a little more difficult to do pancreatic, an organ transplant with the pancreas. It's kind of friable, breaks up a little bit easier. Pancreatic islet cells are composed of alpha and beta cells. So you have alpha let's see, alpha cells come from the pancreas. And you also have beta cells as well. So these alpha and beta cells secrete hormones, right? So the alpha cells secrete glucagon, and the beta cells secrete insulin. These are the two cells. And we have delta cells, two in the pancreas that are like somatostatin, and they keep a balance between these two, but I'm not going to talk about those cells right now. The alpha and beta cells secrete hormones into the blood rather than into the ducts. So that way we see that the pancreas is an endocrine organ. And most people that have problems with their pancreas, or really it's usually like the insulin receptors, they go see an endocrinologist, and usually we call those people diabetic. So this will show you how we have to keep a balance between the glucagon and the insulin. So alpha cells release the glucagon, and the beta cells release the insulin. The functions of the pancreas, I'm always going to ask about function. Functions of the pancreas, they secrete enzymes. When it's enzymes, it's going to go through the ducts. Pancreas will act as an exocrine organ. The beta cells secrete insulin, right here. The alpha cells will secrete glucagon. Now it's acting as an endocrine cell because this is going to go straight through the blood and not use a duct. So that's the duality of the pancreas. Now you've got to remember that the beta cells secreting the insulin, this is where you store glucose. So when I see a cell, for example, here's a cell, and you have a meal, insulin is released in a fed state. A fed state. When you eat a meal, insulin is being pumped from the pancreas, and that is to put glucose in cells. So think about insulin in, and the food, glucose in a cell, right? During a fasting state, however, when you're not eating, and most people are not eating when they're asleep, so you're fasting during that time. Or if you just finished Ramadan, you may have fasted until the sun went down. So during that whole day, from sun up till sundown, you did not eat. So that's fasting. You may have known that your cells are secreting glucagon during a fasting state. And that is to get the glucose out of the cell so that you can function, for the rest of the day. Your brain requires glucose. So if you ever had those people that, they go on a no-carb diet, they're not eating carbs, that's why they're so evil, is because your brain requires glucose. And it gets very irritated when it doesn't have it. So this is just I'm not talking about diabetes in this lecture, but I did want you to kind of get an idea about insulin, and what it's doing is putting glucose in the cells. During a fed state, insulin is released. And then during a fasting state, such as when you're sleeping, or say you're fasting, glucagon is released to get the glucose out of the cell. So, you get your cells, your body can function. Is there anything else I was going to actually say about the interesting thing too about the pancreas is that it releases, the pancreas secretes mucus and alkaline fluid when it's stimulated by something called secretin. So I want you to know that the pancreas will secrete alkaline material and some mucus, and we're going to talk more about that when we get to the third lecture. The other thing is about the pancreas as an exocrine gland. It will secrete enzymes. We mentioned that before. As an exocrine gland, it will secrete enzymes called zymogens. This is stimulated by acetylcholine, and the main one that's secreted are two of them actually. CCK. It's called a CCK. We just call it CCK so much that cholecystokinin is what it stands for. If you see that in your text while you're reading, that's just cholecystokinin. It's just a kind of a short way of saying CCK. And also the pancreas will secrete secretin. They both have functions to stimulate the gallbladder. And let me go back over that to make sure, because I think I want to rehash what I said. I want to correct what I said. The exocrine glands the exocrine ducts will have enzymes go through it, zymogens, right? And that part of the pancreas is stimulated by acetylcholine and CCK. Not that the pancreas secretes CCK, but it will be stimulated by CCK and acetylcholine. So let me make that correction, right? And that's really about it. I want you to understand that where endocrine comes from for the hormones and enzymes going through exocrine. So the next time we meet will be the third and final video. That will be the physiology part of anatomy and physiology for GI. So let's look for the next video concerning physiology.